I don't think it matters what the demographic or medium is. In my opinion, a good cast of characters is arguably the most appealing part of telling a story. Sometimes it doesn't even matter to some people if the plot is nonsensical or convoluted. People can like a series based on characters alone. Now, obviously, you should have a well-written and thought-out story, not to undermine the other main aspect of, well, storytelling, but my point is, sometimes good characters are all you need. Good characters generally have personalities that are appealing, relatable, or fit what a story needs. Everyone has a favorite character and a reason for liking them, and I sure have my share. They're either someone who I personally relate to, they have a really well-developed arc that I like, or they're just a fun character to watch. The point I'm trying to get at here is that these characters resonate with us, and we have an emotional connection to them. But if you ask me, my favorite cast of characters is from Thomas and Friends. Yeah. I know even for Thomas fans that might be a bold statement, and I will fully admit that a lot of that comes from the nostalgia bias I have towards this franchise, but I think it also comes from the way that the author of the Railway series books, Reverend Wilbur Awdry, writes his stories.
Well, when you're writing a children's book, you're writing for the unfortunate parents who've got to read it aloud, time after time after time after time. You've got to put in little funny bits, subtle bits, which they'll enjoy, and then there's the simple slapstick stuff, which the child will enjoy.
When I was young, we used to, on Sundays, we used to have to read horribly boring moral stories about good little boys and girls. They were held up as moral examples. Well, my stories are nothing like that. The engines have human characteristics. Like children, faced with a prohibition, as every child does, they push it and push it and push it to see how far they can go.
Which I think reflects a lot in the way he writes his stories. He respected his child audience and understood how they thought. So naturally, I've learned to appreciate these characters in a different way as an adult than as a child. The characters in his stories are constantly bickering.
Dirty tracks, dirty sidings, ugh. What are you boiler aching about? I remember on the Great Western, that tin pot railway. Tin pot indeed. Let me tell you.
I'm not happy. I know, said Duck. It's boiler ache. It's not boiler ache, protested Gordon. Of course it is, interrupted Henry. That water's bad. Have a good washout. Then you'll feel a different engine. Your boiler must be full of sludge. Don't be vulgar.
They're like a bunch of guys at a bar. They always have something to talk about and poke fun at. And most of Wilbert's characters have a personality that reflects their basis and origin. A small shunter is more energetic and likes playing jokes, or wants to see the world outside their yard, while a big engine has a very demanding and powerful personality. We give the series a lot of credit for being realistic, being based on real engines and real events and whatnot, but I think it also helps that the characters themselves feel realistic. Characters who aren't too dissimilar to personalities you would come across in real life. There's characters who are kind, wise, jovial, sympathetic, naive, and most infamously, assholes. And in my opinion, no character encompasses that more than Gordon the Big Engine. Gordon is the number 4 blue engine on the Sodor Railway who pulls the express, the fastest and most powerful of Sir Topham Hatt's string of engines. And he knows it. Because of this, Gordon is sometimes pompous, boastful, very prideful of his work, and has quite the superiority complex. And when he gets to be too much sometimes, he later gets his comeuppance. Gordon is a flawed character. I don't mean flawed as in badly written. I mean flawed as in having negative personality traits that make them feel real. Because we as humans are flawed. The most flawed characters are the most fun to write for, because it's typically very interesting to see them struggle and end up in a different place at the end of the story than at the beginning. A flawed character who struggles and learns through the trials they're put through is way more interesting than a character who is perfect at everything they do from beginning to end. Despite this, flawed characters are good characters. Like people in real life, they absorb lessons and techniques in a bid to fill what they're lacking in life. And in Gordon's case, he is the vessel for one of life's most important lessons. You don't learn from success, you learn from failure. In a typical Gordon story, Gordon starts off by being pompous or complaining about his current state. He states everything as if it were fact.
We tender engines have a position to keep up. It doesn't matter where you go, but we are important. And for Sir Topham Hatt to make us do shunting, fetch coaches, and go on some of those dirty sidings, it's not the proper thing.
Interestingly, sometimes it isn't out of ego. Sometimes he states it as, this is the way the world works. And he's not wrong in some instances. And because he himself thinks he's on top of the world, he's an asshole because of it. Later, karma bites him in the ass, and he learns sense. The most important thing to Gordon is his pride, and when you shatter that, it humbles him. This is very effective moral execution, especially for kids. Kids don't learn by just simply telling them the thing that they're doing is wrong. No, it's more effective to just let them make their own mistakes and learn through experience, not exclamation. Sometimes you can't teach someone what to do. A lot of the time, it's easier for them to learn what not to do.
Don't do that.
So what exactly separates Gordon from other characters like Henry and James, who are also selfish and stuck up? Well, Henry is more cynical and easy to irritate because, given his dark history, he unjustifiably thinks that because he's had a terrible life, he has the right to complain. Whereas James is more narcissistic and is in denial about the reality that he's not as good as he thinks he is. Gordon's ego stems from the fact that he actually is the fastest and best, and not just trying to be so. Gordon's character development all stems from the concept of being at the top. Yes, you are the backbone of the railway's passenger express service, but you need to be someone who's worthy of that privilege and the responsibilities that come with it. Now, is this flawed and pompous personality all Gordon amounts to? Absolutely not. Even the most antagonistic characters have some level of sympathy to them, and Gordon is no exception. When Gordon matures, he realizes that ultimately having a big ego will get you nowhere in life. He gradually has a change of heart and chooses to help others, and it's through these other characters that Gordon grows and learns from. Now, Edward is the first character to really have an impact on Gordon. Gordon was belittling and very rude to him. And even so, Edward went to help him when he got stuck on a hill. Edward made Gordon believe in himself even when Gordon was being arrogant and disagreeable. And Gordon later mirrors this when he helps James after he was dismissive to Gordon. James is kind of similar to Gordon, however, as we discussed earlier, he is more vain and egotistical when he really has no right to be. He isn't that big, and he doesn't pull coaches as much as the others, but he still thinks he's more important than he actually is. And so he sees Gordon not only as an equal, but as a role model, and looks up to him, although he never admit it. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, we have Thomas. In the very first episode of the show, Thomas is being a little shit to Gordon, and Gordon of course wants to pay him out, and so he does. Now this brings out Gordon's schemy side. Along with James, he and Thomas are generally the ones that Gordon pays out the most for being jackasses. Just because he's being an asshole from time to time doesn't give them any right to be one either. But it does hit a bit harder in Thomas's case. In the episode Down the Mine, Thomas is teasing Gordon for falling down a ditch, only for him to later fall into a mine shaft. Gordon finds it hilarious, I mean, who wouldn't? And then helps pull him back. And after this, these two share a special bond. Like, yeah, they cheese each other every now and then, but it's very clear that there's no real malice between them. Thomas and Gordon throughout the series have a sort of older brother, little brother sort of relationship. Just like any siblings, they start off pestering each other, but as they mature, they learn that they can rely and get along with each other. Like in Hero of the Rails, where the two smile at each other while avoiding Spencer, who's trying to find out the secret to Hero. Hero, by the way, has this to say about Gordon.
When Gordon smiles, it changes his whole face. It is most interesting.
Which really goes to show that Gordon really is a different engine when he puts on a smile. God, I love this movie. And we were just on the topic of Spencer, and he has another really important dynamic with Gordon. When Spencer is introduced, Gordon is actually secretly impressed by Spencer, and when he tries to give him advice, he is rudely shot down.
You'll need to take on plenty of water, muttered Gordon. I have plenty of water, wheezed Spencer.
And he raced away.
I like to think that Gordon saw a little bit of himself in Spencer, reflecting on how he put others down just because he was more elite than them, and when Spencer's ignorance bites him in the ass, Gordon naturally proves that he's better, and he still helps him out. From this point on, Gordon and Spencer have a bitter rivalry, and oh my god, I love it so much. An A1 and an A4. Both cousins designed by the same person, but they despise each other and are constantly trying to one-up another. And major props to their two US voice actors, Carrie Shale and Glenn Rage respectively. These two are great on their own, but in the Gordon and Spencer scenes, they bounce off each other perfectly.
Racing again, are we, Gordon? Yes, we are. And no slipping off onto a siding this time. As if I'd do something like that.
They're like two silver fox athletes, always going head-to-head, and they have a burning desire to prove that they're better than the other. And surprisingly, this arc has a conclusive end to it. In the episode Confused Coaches, where they get so caught up in their rivalry that they both get into trouble, and they later apologize to one another and realize that this petty rivalry hasn't gotten them anywhere, and they put it aside and start anew. Now let's talk about a very similar dynamic. How can I not bring up The Flying Scotsman? In 2016, the movie The Great Race was released, the exact same year that The Flying Scotsman returned to Steam, and in said movie, Scotsman himself is introduced.
I didn't think there were famous engines on Sodor.
Oh, hello, Gordon. Do you two know each other?
Yes, Thomas. This is my brother. They call him the Flying Scotsman. Indeed they do.
Now, the Railway series is the more definitive take on Gordon and Scotsman's dynamic. Oh, don't worry, we'll come back to this later. But that's not to say I don't love what they do here. In fact, I can totally see why they went in this direction. Gordon feels emasculated by his more successful brother, as he is the world-famous Flying Scotsman. And I think this says a lot about Gordon's character. It explains his desire to be better than everyone else. While the rest of this movie is pretty half-baked, all things considered, the Gordon and Scotsman stuff is without a doubt the best part of it. In this movie, Gordon becomes streamlined for the Great Race, and he will stop at nothing to beat his brother. He is driven to win. Of course, he's in such a hurry that he forgets his safety valve and overheats in the middle of the race. If this was real life, he would have exploded, but it's a kid show. But this just goes to show that Gordon will push himself to near death if it means he is at the top. Now, of course, the two are still brothers, and Scotsman still does respect Gordon, and to him it's all just playful teasing.
Why can't you call me Gordon? Because I'm your big brother, which makes you my little brother. Little brother.
Now, I just went over what I feel are the most interesting dynamics that Gordon has, but there are of course more, such as Henry, Percy, hell, even some side characters like Sir Handel or Salty. And while it is severely underdeveloped, I do like what they were trying to do with Rebecca as Gordon's disciple character, I would say. Gordon has such a good range with other characters, and not only do these characters have an impact on Gordon, Gordon has an impact on them. But if you want the most definitive Gordon episode that showcases everything he's all about, look no further than Season 9's Respect for Gordon. The episode begins by stating that Gordon's firebox makes a rattling noise when it cools down at night, which keeps everyone up. And he's actually a bit embarrassed about it. And as someone who used to have a snoring problem that bothered my friends, I can kind of relate. But one night, Thomas and Percy start to make fun of Gordon, and it later creates a chain reaction where everyone starts teasing him. And Gordon hates feeling belittled. He is the fastest and strongest engine on the railway, and he feels the other engines should remember that. So he starts to act imposing on everyone and demanding respect. He later asks that when everyone sees him, they give him a polite whistle. And of course the others are like, no, what makes you think we'd do that, you selfish prick? And later, when Emily doesn't follow through with Gordon's request, Gordon gets so distracted by your ignorance that he runs a red signal and crashes. And of course he's made fun of more than ever in this state. Now, this is a very typical Gordon story so far, like we discussed earlier. He acted selfish and rude, and later got his comeuppance. But this already pretty good episode actually continues after this, and shows a little more. Gordon gets sent away to be repaired, and Henry and Emily take turns pulling the express for him. One night, they realize that, holy crap, pulling a non-stop express train and crossing the island back and forth twice before noon is really hard work.
It's hard work pulling the express. Gordon must be very strong to pull the express so fast. I miss Gordon.
The others come to realize that they took Gordon for granted, and that when they were continuously shitting on him, they were no better than Gordon demanding respect out of them. Gordon even has this line.
Thank goodness for Emily and Henry, he thought. I'm sure they're doing a very good job.
Gordon eventually gets repaired, and the episode ends where they all get real with each other and have a genuine conversation.
I know my rattle kept you awake at night, and I'm sorry.
And I was also silly about the toot-toots. I realize now that engines toot-toot other engines because they work hard and deserve it, not because they ask for it.
But we think you do deserve it, Gordon, said Thomas. Because you work hard and you are a really useful engine.
Everyone has learned to respect each other. Gordon apologizes and learns that respect is earned, not demanded out of others, while at the same time, the other engines learn that Gordon is a hard-working engine and they should not belittle him. I know to some this may seem like a very simple moral, but I feel like it's one that humanity tends to forget. We take people at face value too often and don't realize that someone might have more going on inside of them. And we are all selfish in our own right. I mean, think about it. We constantly think about ourselves and what we want more often than we realize, and sometimes act irrationally because of that. There is a lot our society can learn from this episode. We waste too much time judging others, when maybe we should look in the mirror and start judging ourselves. Of course, we're not excused for our flaws and should be held accountable when we get stuck up our own asses, but we should realize that everyone in our world has their own values, backgrounds, and insecurities, and everyone deserves some level of respect, love, and redemption. Respect for Gordon is very much a man versus society story, where most of the main characters play a role, no matter how mundane. Thomas, Percy, and Emily tease Gordon. James and Percy are put upon Gordon's disrespect. Emily ignores Gordon, and later she and Henry feel remorse for taking Gordon for granted. Even Edward is shown helping take Gordon to the works despite his behavior, which is very in character for him. And Gordon, of course, has the biggest arc throughout. And this honestly might be his best episode. Now, has Gordon always been written consistently? Well, yes and no. Now, Gordon has got off kind of easy compared to others, but in his later years he was depicted as always grumpy, boastful, or selfish. Sometimes the writers will make him a bit too much. Now, being pompous is a core part of his character, but the writers unfortunately have to stick to a status quo for a kids show to make these characters a bit more one-note so they stick with kids more. But Gordon's layered and sympathetic side wasn't completely forgotten about. I liken The Truth About Toby, where he shows sadness over the rumor that Toby was going to be scrapped. However, it is inconsistent. You might think I'm only talking about the Brenner era, but let's be real, this started all the way back in season 5 or 6, I want to say. In the Bland Hit era, and even the crappy Nitrogen era, he had his redemption arc in his annual Spotlight episode, but whenever he was a side character, he was still shown as a jerk. Obviously, when a show has 24 seasons and a 40-year run with a company and writing team that changes every few years, there will be inconsistencies. So, which version of Gordon is the definitive one? Well, let's take a look at the Railway series. The Railway series is the original source material that the Thomas and Friends show is based on. Now, if you couldn't tell by the name, the books are a slightly different beast than the show. All the books are generally focused on one other character or an overarching plot or theme. So what exactly makes Gordon stand out? Well, let's go over his stories. In the very first book, he is seen putting down Edward, who is an old retired steam engine. Now, Gordon is based on an A1 Gresley Pacific locomotive, and this book takes place in 1923, so Gordon is the newest thing on railways in this time frame, and being the Northwestern Railway's exclusive express engine, naturally he will be very boastful and act like he's on top of the world. And throughout the rest of the books, he gets stuck on a hill, bursts a safety valve, gets sent down the wrong line, and gets shut up in the shed for leading a strike when he feels like he's mistreated. All of these instances are a result of Gordon being selfish and thinking he is objectively in the right. In his Spotlight book, Gordon the Big Engine, he is once again being selfish by refusing to pull a goods train, and whilst trying to be difficult, he runs himself into a ditch. And through this, Gordon learns to have a sense of humility, and realizes that with great power comes great responsibility. And throughout the book, he has a very subtle arc, where he tries to give James advice, but is refused, and later when it bites James in the ass, Gordon laughs for a bit, and then puts it aside to help out his friend. A very similar thing happens when Thomas makes fun of him for falling into a ditch, only for him to later fall into a mine shaft, and Gordon helps pull him back out. The two have a very sweet conversation and form an alliance.
I'm sorry I was cheeky. That's all right, Thomas. I'm in disgrace, Gordon went on pathetically. I feel very low. I'm in disgrace too, said Thomas. Why, so you are, Thomas. Shall we form an alliance? United we stand, together we fall. You help me, and I help you. Right you are, said Thomas. And buffer to buffer, the Allies puffed home.
They realized that they aren't too different from each other. Both were cocky and learned that it wasn't the right path to take in life because they didn't end up in a good place after the fact, both figuratively and literally. They later stick up for one another to get their jobs back, and in doing so get more than what they asked for. Gordon gets the privilege of pulling the Queen of England's royal train. Thomas fetches the coaches for it, and both receive honorable praise from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II herself. What an arc for the two, and after this, Thomas and Gordon are never rude to each other again. After this, Gordon has a bunch of different sides that show. He puts Percy in his place after he's being a prick. He supports Donald and Douglas both staying on the railway when he hears one of them might be scrapped. And he respects Duck and Stepney, both in which are tank engines, for showing up the new diesel and tackling the express. And in the story, Gordon goes foreign. He gets into an argument with some other engines about what the big station in London is called.
I remember going to London. Do you know the place? The station's called King's Cross. King's Cross? London's Euston. Everybody knows that. Rubbish. London's Paddington. I know. I worked there.
And he does whatever he can to get to London to prove his point. Only to get let down.
London's all wrong. They've changed it. It isn't King's Cross anymore. It's St. Pancras.
Of course, nowadays we know that this is a reference to the fact that there are lots of different stations in London, and what station terminus you went to depended on where you were from. But Gordon tried his damn darnest best to prove something that was so stupid and obvious in hindsight. Now, Gordon still had his moments of pompousness, but it wasn't as common as it was before, and not as bad as it once was either. Now, you could call this character inconsistency, but I disagree. Sometimes it takes a while for a character to fully dissolve a negative trait of theirs. Karma will keep you in check, and life will throw new circumstances your way. Speaking of which, let's talk about the breaking point for Gordon. In the story Tenders for Henry, Gordon becomes very depressed about rumors on the mainland. And of course the others brush him off and crack jokes because they don't understand the severity of the situation. Gordon then asks Sir Topham Hatt,
Is it true, sir, what the Diesels say? They boast that they've abolished steam, sir. Yes, Gordon, it is true. What, sir? All my Doncaster brothers drawn the same time as me? All gone, except one.
Scrapping has been mentioned before, but it was always mentioned in a general sense, and it was never tied or affected another character like it does here. Gordon has to learn that most of his family have been scrapped, basically killed, and the worst part is, he can't do anything about it, and life hits him like a truck. He falls into depression. To help with this, Sir Topham Hatt brings his last surviving brother to see him, who just so happens to be the most famous steam engine in the world, the Flying Scotsman. The two cope by talking about their past and the state of current railways. How sweet. Gordon is the only engine that we interact and see the direct family of, and it's done beautifully. Wilbert intended for Gordon's story to end here, and while this would have been a great end to his story, Wilbert's son Christopher actually decided to continue his father's series, and by association, Gordon's story. He sets up in his first book that Gordon is starting to feel his age, and he even ended up making another Gordon Spotlight book, Gordon the High-Speed Engine. Gordon hears about high-speed trains in England that could easily give him a run for his money. He gets insecure about the idea of replacement and tries his best to prove that he's still an engine of worth. He starts to have a midlife crisis, dealing with several problems like wheel slip, bad reaction to a poor lot of coal, and even struggles up a hill, which is something he hasn't had a problem with since his first book. Sir Topham Hatt is upset with him, but forgives him later, and Gordon proves that he's still an engine of worth.
Yon Gordon's aye a high-speed engine, but it's me who's pulling the high-speed train.
Well, not anything groundbreaking, honestly. I do really like this book. In the final book of the Railway series, we find out that Topham has purchased Pip and Emma the HST for his railway. He explains to Gordon the purpose of this, and while it's never outright said, Gordon gradually starts to understand what this means for him. Retirement. And he doesn't make a scene or beg to be kept on. He takes it, with honor and dignity. And just like that, he is put in the very same position of which he mocked at the very beginning. It all comes full circle. We even get one final story of him in his new line of work, pulling smaller local trains, and he even helps put out a fire, proving that his life always has worth. Gordon in the Railway series represents life. Let's go through it. Infancy. He is extremely selfish and thinks he's the most important thing in the world, and through trial and error, learns that he isn't. Adolescence. The most memorable experience of his life, and continues to learn humility. However, while he's hit his high points, he later learns how dark the world really is by dealing with the death of loved ones. Adulthood. Gordon is middle-aged and starts having issues that make him fear the inevitable death and losing what makes him happy, and eventually over time comes to accept that while the end may be near for him, he chooses to live every day as if it were his last. Elderhood. Gordon humbly retires from his line of work and enjoys his simpler, quieter life in his later years. How poetic. Was it the Audrey's intention to make Gordon this deep and layered? Maybe not, but I feel what Wilbert brought to the character and how Chris continued the arc really makes Gordon stand out for the crowd. I don't necessarily think he's the protagonist of the series, as there's tons of other characters who have their time in the spotlight and are worthy of praise. But I find it so fascinating that these two managed to personify the stages of human life with a fucking train. We as individuals may not last long in this world, but the things we create, they will last forever. A long time ago, if you asked me who my favorite Thomas character was, I wouldn't really know what to tell you, as it was never really set in stone, and it generally just depended on my mood. As a kid, I think my favorite was Edward, probably because he was the only one who wasn't an asshole, and honestly, I probably would have told you I hated Gordon because of how flawed he was. But Gordon is a character I've learned to appreciate more and more as I grow older, and I can personally relate to him on so many different levels. And I think anyone of any age can learn things from him, through the lessons he learned, to being someone worthy of respect. Gordon represents pride, humility, and self-worth. And now, I can say with full confidence and certainty that Gordon is my favorite character in Thomas. He's my favorite character from any show or book. Gordon the Big Engine is my favorite character in all of fiction.
It's really tiring to be such a large and splendid engine. One does have to keep up appearances, so...
Beep, 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 beep. Hello, fat face.
Fancy speaking to me like that. Me, who has never had an accident. Whoosh! Get me out! Get me out!
Oh, help!
I'm sorry. I realize now that engines toot other engines because they work hard and deserve it, not because they ask for it.
But we think you do deserve it, Gordon, because you work hard and you are a really useful engine.
I'm sorry I was cheeky. That's all right, Thomas. I'm in disgrace. So am I. Shall we form an alliance?
Remember, Thomas, united we stand, together we fall. You help me, and I'll help you. Make Thomas have his branch line again.
Can Gordon pull coaches again now?
I think you are both sorry and deserve a treat.
Express coming through! I am Gordon. I am fastest and best, and I pull the express.
Remember, you are the fastest engine on the island.
This might be my last trip, but I'll get the children to their boat on time.
When Gordon smiles, it changes his whole face. It is most interesting.
Dirty or clean, I'm a famous machine.
But we better hurry. Everyone is waiting. See? We're right on time.
I can't stop! I won't stop! You engines from Sodor are made of sterner stuff than I thought.
Scrap Gordon, the fastest engine on Sodor? Who would pull the express?